salary. We had a lot of controversy on this particular one as to what was the correct number for the police chief, since he's retiring. What we ended up saying is if it was an internal hire, based upon what the selectmen do, it would probably be less. But we couldn't say that it would be an internal hire, because we're not the hiring board as far as advisory. That's up to the selectmen to do that. So we left the actual amount for the police chief exactly what our police chief is doing and getting. It's up to them to work that contract. Like to see him get a lot less, but we can't make that decision. We can only say that we feel comfortable that we should be able to get somebody for that to replace somebody that's leaving, and actually a long-term employee for the community. There was other cuts that was made in their budget that impacts them later on, and I'll talk about them later on as we scroll down here. If we'll get down to the highway department. Here's it right there, highway department. In our original budget that we presented last week, and this, we had to take and end up having the administrator check with town council in this. We cannot end up joining the highway and the cemetery on a budget. We thought we should at least look at that as a possibility. When we had that budget up there, we were looking at funding some additional people to do both of those. I took the opportunity here to go back and put the exact budget that we had last year. That's something that my board is going to have to take and end up discussing. Why do I say that? One of the suggestions I'm going to end up recommending to them is that they look at this, and I don't know how it's going to be, is that out of that 290, that we fund 260,000. That's basically one employee from where we are today. So it minimizes the impact. We're talking about bringing back people for next year. Yes, we're going to lose one individual. But that 30,000, I'll tell you where that's going to go when I end up looking at the next item, would be the cemetery department. Just go down to the cemetery. Cemetery department. Since we cannot end up joining them, still need a superintendent. We put the salary back for that individual. We are still under the assumption that we will end up taking the cemetery department, in order to save costs, for a trailer that we've been spending $2,200 to $2,500 for the last 10 to 20 years. It's in bad shape as it is, and an administrative assistant out of the budget. So that the amount of expenses hasn't gone up, but the employees are coming back. The 94 was for 2 permanent employees plus summer help. And looking at that, my suggestion to my board is going to be, let's take 30,000 out of there, which represents the summer help, and put it into some other budgets, and I'll talk about that in a second. What does that do? Because one of the things that I heard, and I've been listening very, very carefully to what's going on, and I'm going to bring that information to my Adv.Board, is that the 2 departments work very well together. In fact, one of the things I heard today was that on Saturday, the cemetery superintendent will be ending up 2 funerals, or was it 1?
Correct.
2 funerals. And I don't see Bud's left. He found out right then, this afternoon, that in order to take and end up helping his fellow superintendent, he will end up being there to help Alan. That's the level of commitment we have between those 2 departments. So if we end up having a superintendent and 2 employees, we still have a department which we can end up sharing during the summer or whatever throughout the year, but still reducing by 30,000 and putting that into 2 areas, actually 3 areas. If you go back up to the police budget first of all. One more. The police budget last year was $677,000 roughly. That represents about 2 officers. I'm going to suggest to my board that somewhere between $35,000 to $40,000 be put back in this budget to get 1 more officer back on shift. And that's really up to the department head as to how he manages that. The other amount of money would be the department right under it for the fire department and allocating them $10,000. So now we're at $50,000 of what I just told you we pulled out of those 2 departments. If you scroll down to the communications, please. Lastly, the communications actually asked for more money than that. I think it was well over 200,000. Yeah, it was 210. To give them 10,000. That's, by the way, this is another department that we need to take in. We have a full service dispatch. That's so we don't have any cuts within that department because they service everybody in this community. That's still under what they requested and what was there last year. None of these, moving this money around between all these departments, hasn't given any of the departments more money. But my recommendation to the board is that we still stay with the cuts that we have, because this is a long-term implication that if we bring back certain employees and try thinking of not laying them off, we have a long-term issue that not only goes for this year, next year, and the year after. We still have to pay those folks. So at some point, this community has to take it up consolidating and taking biting the bullet basically on how many employees that we can end up having on our budget basically. So those are some things that have impacted. Those are some things that we'll be discussing. In fact, I just sent that to my board over the weekend as a suggestion so that they can review this along with the proposal you're going to see from Selectman Morrison. They haven't seen what the department heads have done, and I have not seen it either. And as you heard, I don't know, you haven't even said what they ended up coming up with. The department heads, when they went through the budget today, I guess, found out how difficult this was, and it's a very painful process. Their budget at the bottom line is $400,000 more than both Mr. Morrison's and the advisory board. Unfundable. It's unfundable. We went through a lot of budget hearings. We looked at a lot of communities. And this is what the advisory board will probably be looking at with we'll probably end up having to polish this up on Wednesday. So I present that as what's happened on the plus side as well as trying to move some money around. Yes?
Well, can we go back to my salary for a minute?
Sure.
Can you tell me what it says?
Oh yes, one other thing. Since Miss Diana Morrison's here, is when we took the $120,000 and put it in to all the budgets, there was $695 left over. Yes, that goes to the per diem payment for the health agent.
So is that $15,695?
That's right. It went up by $695, which is about at $30 an hour, represents about 20 hours more of per diem.
Okay.
Okay? Yes?
I think that the department heads kind of just ran out of time today. We went at it with funding what we thought was appropriate for each department, and then we were gonna cut based on the bottom line, and then we basically had to wrap up just in time to come here. I think if we had more time, we would have been more frugal and gotten it down to the bottom line that was needed.
Yes, Al?
Again, I'd like to go back to my salary for
Yes,
a minute.
okay.
I want to just clarify what you have there.
Okay.
What is the number?
Your salary would be the same as, you know,
What is, yeah, but what is the number that you have up there? Because I can't read it.
54,936.
Correction on the number. The number should be 54,726.
Oh, okay.
54,936 was the requested amount on the budget.
Oh, okay, that was, I went back to the requested number versus what the.
I know it's only a little bit, but
Couple $100 here or there is gonna help out somebody along the way.
54,726, did you say?
54,726.
726. One of my advisory board can end up jotting it down when we talk about that, please. Any other questions before I? Yes.
Yes, I have some paperwork here I'd like to distribute to all of you. It will be regarding my budget and how I can fund part of my budget. Okay, if you will read from third page. Put here. Not going to take any money from anybody. Just going to transfer some within my accounts. With what it is now, my department is going to fall together. I'll get DEP in here to do it next week. You'll have another one. Anybody else in work?
George, we have one for the record.
I gave,
Mr. Andrews,
yeah,
if I could, one of the things that we had also said, and you might have missed it because you haven't been to some of the meetings, was the consolidation of support for your department would be under land planning. And you would end up, instead of having 5 hours of having somebody being able to take documentation in, that would extend to whatever that individual is. And I believe that individual is either 18 or 22 hours.
yeah, I haven't been to the meeting because we had your meeting, but I had other commitments.
We understand that.
Okay, let's do something to see.
Right.
What we're
So we
thinking about.
wanted to give more coverage to you by consolidating that with another one.
I appreciate that.
So there's a number of things that we still talk about as far as consolidation. Is there any question?
Thank you very much. Next, if we could hear from Doug, Selectman Morrison, regarding his budget and what his goals and objectives were.
Okay, I mean, I do have it, you can show it on the screen if you'd like to see that. Talk to it. The sheet that got passed out evidently got pointed out to me that there is a few mistakes in it, so it's not right numbers. But basically, I just thought the select board should, put forth something. Certainly not trying to undermine the work that the advisory board has done. They've certainly spent a lot more time working and developing the budget than I did over the last 2 weekends. I really had two objectives. One is so that we might have a second alternative at looking at. And again, the department heads then had two things to look at as they worked on their version, and the department heads, may, if they had more time, come up with a better solution than either one of us. But my budget was based on, or the budget that I would, am just throwing out here, it's based on reducing the work week to 32 hours for nearly all departments. The police and the fire would get reduced to 36 hours, but dispatch would stay at 40 hours. The COA and the library continue with their normal operations. I went as far as even proposing what I would recommend as new working hours based on the 32-hour week. A few assumptions that went into the budget is that the planning board takes on the administration of the Conservation Commission, and their administrator would then get an increase of 2 hours. We would combine the administration of the building department and the board of health. The selectmen only retain one admin. The treasurer and collector's office do get combined. The accountant, the building inspector, and the health agent are reduced to 20 hours a week. And then expenses are cut from the FY14 approved budget by 20% across the board. And by
Excuse
doing
me,
that,
I'll scroll down if you like. These numbers on the right are the ones we just put in this afternoon. These were department head recommendations. Your budget there is the
green column.
green one, and in the middle is the advisory board recommendation, but you were working with a file that wasn't completely up to date because the file that the advisory board just put up there was done this weekend.
Right. So my numbers are going to be off slightly, but again, I'm not a financial scientific expert. That's why we rely on the people in the town administrator, the advisory board, to know the numbers down to the exact penny. I mean, my numbers are relatively close, and for budgetary purposes, I think they would suffice, but they may not be exact to the penny. Okay, so continuing on, in what I would propose, there are increases in the emergency reserve, the technology, and the building maintenance. There are small increases for the town administrator and the combined treasurer, collector, and assistant treasurer, collector positions. But everything else is pretty much level funded. And this is a devastating budget. I mean, the advisory board's budget is devastating, this budget is devastating. They're not either one very rosy. And services to the community are going to be impacted, no doubt about it. This budget does save most of the town jobs and provides for a little sum of money to get transferred into stabilization. Might be better at this point in time, though, because instead of putting that in stabilization, to perhaps use it, to offset expenses and things like that. And then I've just got a couple, a line in summation is, in order for the town to begin recovery, we need these levels of cuts. And we need to start rebuilding slowly. Restoring services as we can, and getting our wage structure back to a competitive level. It's clear that Prop 2.5 is not enough to cover our uncontrollable expense increases like retirement insurance and such. I, as a selectman, would like to see small general budget overrides annually, perhaps something like 25 cents. A 25-cent override would typically cost the average household about $40 a year and would bring in about $125,000 in revenue. And that's, again, typically average, whatever you want to say. It's not exactly the but this would be an easily managed increase, for a homeowner, $40 a year. Plus, it would give us additional revenue that we could put with the Prop 2.5 revenue that would let us slowly build back and cover our, uncontrollable increases, as well as hopefully be able to apply a little bit to stabilizing salaries and getting them back competitively. If you want to walk through, you can kind of see the bottom line there. 6,252,640, and that puts 47,242 available in stabilization. That 100,000 in additional revenue. I was emailing with Bob on Sunday. We had an increase in state aid. There's potentially some money from MSBA. I did not know about the adjustment in the retirement that the advisory board just talked about. So there's potential, a little bit more revenue that could come into play. So again, you know, I'm not saying that this budget is any better. It certainly doesn't have the forethought that the advisory board budget does. I just thought that we should throw something else on the table for consideration. And that's it.
Are there any questions?
First of all, thank you, Doug, for finding that. I just have two questions. When we take a 26-hour work week, is there going to be gaps in coverage?
That, again, what I did with that is I just targeted numbers and calculated what the salary reductions would be. It would be up to the department to determine, with the money that they have, how are they going to manage their department? You know, let's use the 32 example for the highway. The highway may choose, okay, we'll work 4 8-hour days, or they may choose, all right, we're going to continue to work 5 days, but we're going to reduce a person. And again, those management kinds of things, in my mind, are things that the department heads should be doing. We shouldn't be directing the department head to you have to work this, or you have to get rid of this, and that type of thing. We give them a budget, they need to manage their department within that budget.
And my other concern, and I don't really have anything to back it up, it's just a concern, are we
Sorry, John, we
adequately
can't hear
funding
you.
the town accountant? Does the accountant have enough hours to do what needs to be done?
You know, I mean, 20 hours, you know, I mean, the bulk, again, I'm not a financial expert, I don't know all the inner workings of the financial department, but it's my understanding that the bulk of the work is probably done by the treasurer and collector, and then the accountant is really just making entries into the system. So the level of work on the accountant, I believe, is less once the books are up to date. Now, Matt's putting in a lot of hours because the books are so out of whack. And once we get the books back in schedule, I think the demands for the accountant are less. But again, I'm not a financial expert, I can't say that with certainty.
With either of these budgets, both the advisory board and Doug's budget, and I do appreciate the amount of work that this takes to deal with the situation that we're in. In order not to stay in this situation or to ever get into this situation again, we have to make sure that we are adequately funding our financial team. We have to make sure that we are adequately funding the treasurer, the collector, and the accountant. And I don't think that there's enough money in the accountant's salary. The hours, I think it can be done in 20 hours, but I don't think we can find a qualified person for that amount of money that's budgeted to do the job. And I don't want to be here again. All right, I don't think anybody does. But in order to avoid not being here again, we're going to have to try to find a way to appropriately fund that line item so that we're paying a good wage so that we can attract the candidate to get the job done. Sure.
There was considerable discussion of that particular item this afternoon with the department. And we didn't change the number, but it's clear that that's the key position. Once the financial records are in good condition, the work will drop back some. And clearly that much funding is not going to get a qualified person who's capable of doing the job and enabling the town to avoid current problems.
What dollar amount did you suggest?
Well, we went back and forth on that, and we didn't really reach an agreement. But
If I can. We had looked at that, and based upon the fact that this last year, we had an accountant that was working in another, 2 other facilities, that was what we looked at per se, if the books were in good order, which we know they're not. To take and fund someone like Mr. Angel is just out of the possibilities for us as a community right now. I feel badly about that because we still have an issue. Some of the things, in fact, one of the first things I saw when I ended up looking at this on Sunday morning, my first call after I looked at my email and saw that I had received it from Mr. Morrison is I called him up and said, thank you very much, and let him know that we had looked as an advisory board on cutting hours. It was not recommended by us because of the impact for services to the entire community. So we chose to actually fund some of those, get rid of the administrative people 40 hours so that we would be still servicing those communities, and you can see some of the things that we have done with the budgets and some recommendations there. At some point, like I said earlier, we need to take and end up looking at the amount of employees. If we have so many employees and they're drawing benefits beside, that's another expense that we're paying in another area. I mean, there is nothing that we didn't look at as an advisory board on benefits, as well as every line item by line item, as we presented last time in our presentation. It was a grueling process that we started way back at the end of December, beginning of January, before we even start the reviews. We were looking at other communities and how they ended up doing their budgets to get some ideas as to how we line up as a community versus others. That was a baseline. I will say this, that a majority of the departments, we asked for this to happen. 6 to 8 weeks of functions that they performed on a daily basis as a log to help us identify what level of service that they were giving in their budget and how we could end up addressing that within the budget. Every department except one provided that. They basically broke the bylaw that says that if we ask for some information, that they supply it. They didn't supply it. So we had to do a fallback as to their particular department and looking at other communities and doing an analysis on that basis. So a lot of the pre-work and work that we went through of many hours of asking, as a couple of the selectmen know, we did ask quite a bit of questions when the select board came in on their items. Every department went through that as far as questions on their budget, so we had a better handle on what they were doing. So I mean, I just want to lay that out, because if we go to the 32 hours, are we ending up creating an issue here where people are going to be on the bubble and not know because we can't get enough revenue in? We either take the bite now, as I said earlier, or at some point we're going to have to do that if we don't have overrides, as you stated, whether they be 25 cents or $25. That's not for advisory board to recommend. As we say, we recommend on the finances of the community. The select board is the ones that have to take and recommend overrides, and that's really where the buck stops with them. We would look at that later on and recommend, yes, that's a good idea for that amount of money, or no, it's not.
Yeah, I was just looking through this, and I want to thank all who were involved, the department heads, selectmen, working on numbers. It's really hard as an advisory board member to try and get your head around each of the departments and what they do, and to have them kind of in the same boat, realizing that we've got to get to that bottom line number, and to see their stab at it's very helpful. I did a couple questions in there. I think there might be a typo on the general government website, because there was a large increase there. Did someone is that supposed to be 25,000 or 2,500? Just so when we're looking on the, okay, because it's listed as 25,000, so that's what I thought.
Where is that?
That's under the website. It looked like when I added it up, let's see, page 2. And another small item, I was looking on page 3 on the sealer of weights and measures. We were under the understanding that that was a fixed amount that the town has to pay, which is why we didn't change that, but I see that it is changed in some of these other budgets. What is the amount that we end up having to pay? I mean, is there flex, or is there a contracted rate that we pay somebody?
Let me try to answer that. The last couple of years, we have been budgeting $1,800, and by law, we have to have somebody do the weights and measures. That's contracted out. Now, the question that I had in talking with the administrator is, where's the contract? And who has it? And he said he's going to have to look into it. He's got much greater things to do than look into this particular contract.
I know it was a small amount, but I'm just, you know.
You're correct about the website. This afternoon, I was doing the updating and also engaging in dialogue and so forth.
It looked like that because...
It should have been 2,500 and it is 2,500.
Yeah, because adding the numbers up for that section, you know, came to that. Also, in the library, when we had gone over the library section on page 4, we were under the understanding that there's a certain amount that we need to fund or we will no longer be part of the Central Mass, or the Massachusetts. Does this department head numbers, would that keep us allowed to be in that?
We discussed that also. We need to meet a certain standard in order to get the state grant. We need to meet a certain standard of hours of operation in order to be certified so that residents can use other libraries or can order books from other libraries. Both of those standards are going to be met.
Okay, because we were under the understanding the number was different at the time, so that's good information to have.
We plugged in the number that the library head gave us this afternoon.
Thank you. You know, I want to also encourage everyone in town to be able to, you know, come down to our meeting on Wednesday. We're having that at the Balsonville Road office, town offices there. And, you know, I know we've tried getting these aired as much to the public as well. And hopefully we can find a way to get more of the advisory board meetings out on the television. Because there's been a lot of people saying, what's going on in the advisory board? And we've been saying, we're trying to get that information out. I know there's been challenges getting enough memory, I guess, to get these out on the television. But hopefully we can, so that the community can see some of the discussions and the frustrations that we've been facing. Thank you.
Just if they can end up reiterating that, on a couple of occasions, we did seek to have the cable people come up, and there was a capacity issue because of other meetings that we're going to end up doing, and I don't know all the wherefores, but there was a couple of meetings that we really wanted that they can end up having the community see us, especially going through pre-town, as to the process that we end up going through in the discussion level that takes place at the pre-town before we make decisions.
Yes, Don.
I'd just like to refer back to the discussion on the 32 hours and the employees. I agree 100% that there is opportunity for consolidation, and that it's something we definitely need to look at as we move forward. And I do believe that will be a much easier task to do once we can consolidate offices and we're in a building. But in our current state, where we're spread out in, 8 different facilities throughout town, I just don't really see it being effective and do a lot of consolidation and reduction at this point in time. I don't believe we have too many employees at the moment the way we're currently structured. I mean, when you go into offices, at least the ones I've been into, everybody appears to be generally busy. That's why I proposed the 32 hours and tried to keep most everyone, except for the places where within a same building you could do consolidation. Now, if we are able to get into East Templeton and as we're able to get that facility ready and bring consolidating departments in, I think there are certainly opportunities that we have to look at and should look at.
Just to address one of the issues that was brought up, which I think is a good one, regarding the accountant's salary. You said that there was a level of cushion in your particular for stabilization. What, do we feel that $7,500 increase to that line item, salary line, would be sufficient to make that, what, about 37.5 or 38? Or do you think that we're still undershooting that?
At one point, I think we were talking 45
Oh, okay.
as being ballpark to get qualified.
First line hour job, so they make them a 40-hour position and then they make them 90,000.
That's right.
My guess was closer to 40. I was thinking closer to 40. My concern also, when you're talking about the financial team, is you have to forgive me because I'm looking at numbers and numbers and numbers, and they don't all come at you at the same time. But the town treasurer salary, and if we want to have a good team, that doesn't seem like enough either. So I don't know what, if obviously it was voted to be combined, so the town treasurer and the town collector salary on the draft advisory board, I'm sorry, I couldn't follow all your numbers. It was 45 and 45, so I'm assuming that 45 from the collector or whomever got redistributed in other places. But I don't feel that 45 is enough, and with no assistant. So since they're not combined here, I can't really understand what's going on in that department at the
In the
moment.
department head discussion, we thought that there should be treasurer, collector, and assistant.
Yeah,
Staff.
that makes more
And the
sense,
numbers
but they don't seem to work. Do the numbers work? I mean,
Well, what happened,
well, yeah, you're $400,000 over, but, I
we
mean,
made all the numbers work the way we thought that they should. It blew a little off the budget.
well, I just think that in the financial team, I completely agree with Julie in that we need to staff them appropriately and pay them appropriately in order to not be in this position again, including a town administrator. 80 may be too high. I think 70 is too low. The 75 that someone else was saying seemed to be, these are all just my opinions. I hate to take away from other departments. I'm concerned that we can't get the roads done. I'm concerned that, I liked some of Doug's budget. Do you know what I'm saying? Like kind of picking and choosing. I'm not thrilled about a reduction in hours at all, especially in police and fire. Our public safety is extremely important, but again, the financial numbers for the financial team don't look like enough.
Mr. Chairman, the numbers that you see there for the treasurer versus a treasurer collector should be 55. If you looked at the one that we presented, I see that. It's
I don't
for
have the
the treasurer collector position, it's 55. For the assistant, it's 45. Okay? Because we looked at over 30 communities, the size of 7,000 to 9,000, which we are directly in the middle, to see what comparable salaries were for those communities that had treasurer-collector combinations. Out of those 30 communities, 80% of them have combined treasurer-collector positions, and that was basically the sweet spot as we saw it, between 50 and 55 for the combined treasurer-collector, and about 45 for the assistant. Does that answer your question, Don? I mean, we did look at that.
I'm just curious where.
Yes, we did extensive analysis on that.
Yes.
Taking into consideration the $22,000 error that you found under the general expenses for the, I think it was the internet or the web page, The department head budget, if you look at the bottom number that Doug had, the department head budget is 340,000 over. I know that since these budgets were created, that we know that we've got some extra revenue. So I wonder if you plug in that extra revenue and then see how far apart the department head budget is from the line that we have to hit. And maybe that could be what is the jumping off point. There was some really good creative discussion today, like the town clerk and the town assessor sharing a part-time person who did not exceed 19.5 hours, and then deciding amongst each other how that time is divvied up and when it's needed more in one department than the other. I mean, that type of cooperation that, you know, Will talks about between the cemetery and the highway, that exists among all the departments. And our discussions today reflect that. We just ran out of time.
To answer your question, Bethany, I just did a quick calculation based upon the revenue sheet that we showed, the upgraded one, and there's the one that the departments did is $366,000 above and beyond. So even if you take the 120, it's still
Right, so I
200.
know that further cuts are needed, but could that be the one that you guys are starting to cut from?
To kind of shape discussions, I think that maybe we have to answer a more fundamental question at this hour. I am taking it that we are not going to be voting on a final budget tonight. Or, I mean, I don't know what the rest of the board feels like.
We don't vote tonight.
Well, then we will have to hold another meeting. We obviously can do it tonight, but I don't even, do we want to even pick a good starting place? I mean, because we are all seeing these budgets for the first time, obviously, 2 hours ago. So to try to kind of spend $8 million or $6.5 million, like with 2 hours of review, I don't know how necessarily responsible that would be.
If I can, I mean, I would not be against us having a meeting on Thursday. That gives the advisory board the opportunity to finish and finalize their budget, so we actually have the final advisory board budget. It would also give the department heads an opportunity to continue to fine-tune their budget. So then we would have, you know, some real good things to look at on Thursday. So I think we can post that. We can post that.
Meeting though? Aren't you having a meeting on what day?
They're having their meeting on Wednesday.
And you wouldn't meet again until Thursday?
Right, we gotta have a 2-day posting. So today's Monday, we now can't post till morning.
I understand.
it's
So we're having a
Tuesday,
pre-town
Wednesday,
meeting, but we might vote on
No,
the
we're
budget
not-
the day after?
We're not having a pre-town meeting, we're having, I finalized this budget based upon the most recent numbers that you just saw me present earlier. I know this is confusing because
Forgive the new girl.
we're having to deal with a moving target here also, so we understand this is a lot to take in, and we've been dealing with this for the last 6 months. So, you know, to take it, end up getting into this cold, it is very, very difficult, believe me.
And my other concern would be with meeting on Thursdays, that there's not another town workday before the annual, so in terms of getting the materials, the information out. Yes,
We could probably get enough volunteers to help get it ready.
on Friday too.
Tell us what to do.
Yeah, I'd be, well,
The last comment I'd like to make, though, is, you know, the reason I looked at doing 32 is because there was no way I could get us back to being at 40 hours without drastically cutting the departments to a point where they might not even be able to function. So that's why, in my proposal, I opted to say it would be better to have 32 hours and be able to actually operate the town than to be operating at 40 hours and not have enough people to get any work done.
Yes.
It would be very helpful to us as a board to be able to advise based off of what the, you might say, executive branch or the town administrators are planning to do, the selectmen. And that's why if you have any way that you can get a budget to us ahead of time, it would be easier for us to be able to see what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish. You know, sometimes we sit there and we're almost guessing what your goals might be. And we really need, you know, some type more direction. you know, to do a budget after you look at ours, it is almost negating what the function of our board is.
But, I'm sorry, yeah, I do think it would be difficult for us to do that unless we hold an emergency meeting, say, tomorrow. But I do think if we did defer this, then the department heads would have the opportunity to work on their budget tomorrow and then be able to provide by Wednesday to the advisory board at least what, you know, the department heads have thought is reasonable.
The reason we're having our meeting on Wednesday is the bylaws basically for our recommendations for both the special and annual town meeting, at minimum, has to be in 2 days before the annual town meeting. So we're strapped with trying to get this at least a couple of days before the annual town meeting, which makes us having to have our budget from the advisory board available on Thursday and up on the website, as well as we've got the special town meeting warrant up with our recommendations. We'll be putting up the annual town meeting along with our recommendations and comments, which we have already on the special, but we'll be issuing that either later today or first thing tomorrow in order to take it and end up seeing that. There is a couple of warrant articles that we took no action on. One of them is the budget per se, because we're still working that, and our final end up will either be tomorrow or actually at the annual town meeting of a recommendation one way or the other on a budget. So we would need that at some particular point so that we can end up reviewing that. We'll probably make a decision right there in annual. I'll poll the board members actually on the stage that day, if I have to end up seeing what we will agree to. And I mean, we've done this before in polling on the stage, and that's allowable as far as addressing the issue. So we're constrained by bylaw on when we can end up doing some of this.
The other option would be for us to now basically vote a budget, and we've suggested issues regarding pretty much the financial team's salary. So there's pretty much, we have two structures right now: a 40-hour week with less employees, a 32-hour week with most employees back. And then we had concerns about the pay for the treasurer collector and for the accountant. We could decide what we want those positions to make now, and then ask the town administrator, because it looks like, or we could just say to cut it out of the money that you had set aside for stabilization, say that we're going to increase the 40,000, the accountant, and then we're going to increase the treasurer collector to, what was it, 55? And with those being the most important positions in terms of keeping us out of the situation, and just reduce that bottom line as well. That's also an option. And then if anything major comes up between now and then, we can always address that by motion and by specific reference. But putting this off also, as well said, creates the problem with the advisory board doesn't really have anything to advise on Wednesday because they don't have our budget. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about perhaps choosing a base budget.
Let me just say this, with the inputs that we just got for the accountant, as you heard me say, we would take 30,000 out of what you saw from the highway and from the cemetery. It would still end up having a number of employees. We're not devastating them completely. There's a possibility of us, rather than what I had suggested, of putting some additional money into accountant. That's a decision that will be made on Wednesday. From what I just heard, my board members are hearing this also. We'll have to take and end up considering that.
Mrs. Morrison?
With the advisory board budget, how many 40-hour people would you have?
I'm not sure I heard.
With your advisory board budget, how many 40-hour people would you have?
All the major departments would have, such as the treasurer, the treasurer collector, the select board, the assessor's office. Those would be 40 hours. The others, some of the other departments, such as the building and the health department, would be on a per diem basis with an individual, at least in the health, and this is really not up to us on how the health board will end up allocating, because we had a lot of discussion about that particular thing on how to allocate it. We were looking actually initially to allocate most of the money for the administrative assistant who would do all the daily business, and then end up calling a health agent in on a per diem basis to do only what needed to be done by the health agent. Because I'm sure, in talking with you as the department, we ended up clearly finding out that there's a lot of issues that the administrative assistant has answered before it even gets to the agent. So I mean, that's how we ended up looking at the budget also.
So in your budget, you've eliminated most of the administrative assistants?
That's correct. That's right. And why did we do that? Because what we saw is the fact that we needed to move and consolidate all the operations in one place. And when the select board chose to end up going into one building, we saw that as an opportunity to consolidate. And that's mainly how we ended up saying the administrative assistants would be reduced. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And then with Doug's proposal, you're proposing that we retain most of the administrative assistants.
That's right, because while we're still going to East Templeton, and the ultimate goal is to consolidate, we are not going to be able to move all departments to East Templeton on July 1. That's just not going to happen. I would be happy if we could do it by July 1 of next year. So having one administrative assistant in the selectman's office and people and departments in 7 other buildings, it's just not functionally doable in my mind to only have the second assistant in the selectman's office.
And you're wanting to maintain the department heads at 32 hours also?
Right, a lot of the sheet that we don't have here is where I broke up the hours. Most, the offices would be open 32 hours, and there would be at least one 32-hour person, and then in some departments there would be an assistant that's only 16 hours.
Then I have one more question, I'm sorry. Is there any chance that we would table this until later in the month or into June, when we can get more solid figures?
Yeah, to do that, we have to have another town meeting.
I'm just asking for informational purposes.
Kurt, did you still have?
Yeah, a couple things, actually. I agree with you. You guys need to get together tonight and make a decision, because the last 3 meetings have been the same exact conversation. You need to just say, pick one, throw it down, close your eyes. I agree with what you said, Ken, okay? But, and I know it's not all the bugs are out there, but you need to do something, I agree. But as far as the consolidation of administrative assistants, and we're all in this together, right? So I'm not going to pick on one individual. I just think you're looking at it from numbers. But this is not like you just got somebody stocking shelves at Walmart. You're either putting the cleats on this side and you're doing the napkins on the other side of the aisle. You're talking different departments have different functions. It's not just pick up the phone. The building department has their own, and I'm not, I mean, it's too bad people have to do their jobs. I get that. But I'm looking at the business end of it. Okay, planning board office right now is closed. I had a call from a business person today asking me, how do I do business in Templeton? I said, well, I'm glad, I don't even care where you got my phone number, but keep it, I'll try to help you through. I said, well, the sad part is, as of today, we don't have anybody in the planning board office. And this is just the beginning of the end. You think it's, I think everybody's has to look at it 2 different ways here. You're saying, how can we cut and slash and hash to save money? Well, guess what? We're going to cut our way, we're going to slash our way right into a locked door that nobody's going to be able to open to come and do business in this town, to generate money, to get people back to work. And so I it seems like it's tunnel vision. Save, save, save. You know, we're screwed, screwed, screwed is what it means. So, well, I'm just concerned that we don't have the right person picking up the phone to fill out the right form, to get the people permitted the right way, so we can move forward. Yes, it is about the money right now, and yes, it is about the jobs, but, okay, you're gonna say, conservation's easy. I mean, I was on the board before, I mean, you said it was you're gonna add a couple hours to planning. I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
I don't either.
It sounds good for conversation purposes, but I guess we can handle it, because it's not a real, it's simple as far as state forms go. George agreed, the state forms, they're easy to fill out, okay? But my concern is that somebody's gonna call in, I know the building inspector's administrative assistant is gonna be gone. And for what he said, Diane's gonna be picking up the phone. All due respect to Diane, but has somebody gone over with her, everything she needs to do? Because if Dawn is not coming back, you better get it right the first time. Because that's the problem with this town. We don't have any damn business in this town. It's because of it. We're making it worse. So be very careful when you say, we're just going to hire a new person to answer the phone. The person that came with that idea, as far as I'm concerned, you can leave. It doesn't work. It's one thing to say hello. It's another thing to have the answer to the person when they call. Just a heads up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I understand your frustration. I think, I haven't polled everyone, but I think for just about everyone on the board, they would rather have not been cutting anything either. They would have rather that the override passed, and then we wouldn't be doing this right now. But unfortunately, the bottom line is, and I've said that there are really good reasons why none of the cuts should be made. It's that problem trying to find, then we lay off one more police officer to wait, or I'm not just saying police, but.
I have one other thing. It all boils down to inspectional services and whatnot, whether it be Board of Health, building inspector, or whatnot. Okay, we're going to take them from whatever they'll call part-time, full-time, wherever they are now, down to skeleton or per diem. Has anybody checked with them to find out if this is the job? Because otherwise, we're going to be in a worse shape. We're going to have no inspectional services to continue business as of like. Has anybody even checked with people? Has anybody checked with the building commissioner and say, by the way, you interested for going from whatever, 30 hours to 5 hours? Or the Board of Health, does anybody even check these guys? Because I'm elected and I'm appointed on a whole bunch of stuff, so chances are you can cut me in half to zero, cut in half is still zero. But the things that really matter is that everybody's talking this push job, look, it's a privilege to work for this town. It's a privilege to find a job and get the hell out. But you better check with the inspectional services, people that just keep cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting, assuming you're just going to do it because they owe the town something. By all means, somebody needs to make those phone calls, because if LR inspectors say, not interested, we're going to be in worse shape.
If Select Board tonight could make a decision between the two major proposals, then I could work with one of them and reconvene the department heads, because there were a couple of good ideas that came out of that meeting today. Perhaps try and incorporate some of that, and I would come back maybe tomorrow afternoon, reconvene the department heads, try and get through that tomorrow, and so the advisory board would have what the selectmen would prefer on Wednesday. And do the best we can, because I think, I see good ideas in all three of these concepts, but we really have to focus on one and then try and build in the improvements into one budget.
Do I have a motion from anyone on the select board regarding which of the two, the advisory board or the Doug's, I was supposed to call it Doug's budget that we would like to base our kind of direct Bob to move forward?
Make a motion to proceed with the advisory board budget. I appreciate all the time that you put into this. I like the idea of going out for a small override every year, but something that we have to do. I am concerned about the cut of the hours down to 32. And I think we can incorporate some of your ideas into the advisory board budget. I think the
Is there a second?
Do we get to have any discussion?
No, we'll have it before.
Second.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I
So
still
now-
have questions.
Yep, so we have a first and a second, so discussion.
Okay, so my concern is that, I think in Doug's budget, that you were cutting hours because you were saving assistants, is that correct? I still think I agree with Kirk, that we can't, there's no super assistant out there, I don't know where she is. I'm pretty organized, and I know I couldn't do it, and so if there's no assistants in the advisory board budget, there needs to be some level of something. You know, I would make that recommendation, and then, I'm sorry, Alan, I had some questions for you. I think in the advisory board budget, you gave me a different number for the superintendent's salary, and then there was a $94,000 number. What was that? And was that like for another worker? Was that for your assistant? Because I don't see...
That was basically for his workforce and not for the assistant. The assistant would be,
Okay, not that I don't want you to have another employee, but I'm concerned with you not having an assistant, just like everybody else.
one of the things,
Who's going to do that? Who's going to do that paperwork? Who's going to?
one of the things that we, and I'll go over that again.